I was basically trying to go down the rabbit hole of like, okay, is competition something that's needed to be successful? Then I realized, like, now being older, I'm like, dude, there's so many 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, and 60-year-olds that are just fucked up on the stress side of things because they just are influenced by all these things. And all they do is surround themselves by it. They're like, oh, I don't want to see it, but like, I do want to see it. All right. Good morning. Good afternoon. What's up, everybody? Episode 54, Pursuit of Balance. We're going to talk about competition and mastery. And this is a conversation that stemmed from a quarterly that I did with one of the coaches. And, we were just kind of going over like, hey, what are things that drive you, right? Because I think in work and life, I go through this personally, I would say probably more on the work side sometimes than anything. And I think most people would probably fall in that where you just like, there's seasons, right? There's seasons where you're really motivated. There's seasons where things are going well. And there's seasons where things are harder and more difficult and a little bit more stressful and blah, blah, blah. So I was kind of talking to him and I was like breaking things down of like, hey, at the end of the day, like I think people always function in a role, in a position where they're really in alignment for kind of a balance of like their wants and needs in life, right? And when you can find that alignment, things just feel like you're just being pulled towards it, right? I always love this, Tony Robbins uses this analogy that there's pull and push, right? Pull is attraction and push is force. And a lot of times there's going to be a balance between push and there's going to be obviously, hopefully a lot more pull in things. And I look at that sometimes as some of the extrinsic motivators that we have in life and some of the intrinsic motivators. So I kind of wrote this down in a couple sections. The first section I'm probably going to kind of keep coming back to and probably spend the most time because then I wrote down 10 things of what drives us as humans. Then I wrote kind of the way that I kind of broke down the analogy is like, there's kind of like fuel types, right? There's things that burn fast, there's things that burn slow, and then there's things that compound. And I wanted to kind of tie it into, it's a good book. I actually have it on the bookshelf here, I think. Yeah, I do. Robert Greene. Actually have The Laws of Human Nature. I've read by him, 48 Laws of Power, and then Mastery. So I kind of got a reference to the book a little bit on the mastery side. And the episode itself for me, I was basically trying to go down the rabbit hole of like, okay, is competition something that's needed to be successful, right? And not necessarily just competing with other people, but just the idea of someone being competitive in nature, right? Meaning like, are you competitive with yourself? Are you competitive against others? Are you competitive, blah, blah, blah. My all-time favorite athlete that I watched as a kid was Michael Jordan. And I remember I've probably watched The Last Dance, probably now, I would say. Well, for sure two, maybe even three times I've started it. And I always love that scene. I forget the name of the player. I want to say it's something Smith, but whatever. There's like this game where he like almost creates like this fake narrative that I don't know what, I forget the whole premise of the thing, but he kind of creates this whole fake narrative of basically like causing himself to just be very, very motivated and almost borderline aggro of like, fuck this, we're going to kick this guy's ass in this game. And this guy, I have a number on him, right? And I always remember the one too with Kobe in the Olympics. It's always talked about where they're talking about his teammate and he goes, first play of the game, I know he's going to set up a check and I'm just going to run right through him. And they just poof right through him. And like those little scenarios that you see, I think in athletics, we see it obviously more just because it's more mainstream of like the things that we create mentally to create another layer or like a good way to think about this is like someone that is naturally very competitive. Sometimes we need somewhere to funnel it, right? And like we need an outlet, and I think about this, like I've had this as a podcast idea or title for a while that like, I don't think an addictive personality is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's where are we driving and forcing that energy towards, right? Because I don't necessarily consider myself to be an addictive personality, but I tend to go like all in with something. And like, I was telling this, actually, I've said this a couple times because I get brought up by other coaches like, hey, when are you going to do a competition? When are you going to sign up for something? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't really have that motivation right now, but I'm also, my big thing I've kind of noticed with, just marathons and high rocks and some of like these more competitions that are becoming more mainstream and more popular. And like, it happens every freaking decade. There's something new. But I feel like it's become more performative versus more performance-based. And what I mean by that is like an interesting stat on marathons is marathons been going on for however many decades now. And it's one of the only sports that's actually gotten the average time has gotten worse. And it's not because runners are getting slower. It's just because more people are doing it. And I think the sake of just doing something to do something has never been an attractive kind of like feat for me or an attractive thing. I'm like, if I want to do something, I'm gonna go do it to win it. I don't want to go do it to play. So I'm like, I want to go do it to win it. So I think about this competition side, right? Because like me, like as a kid watching Michael Jordan, or even just as becoming an adult and watching some of the high level athletes, like you watch the greats like Kobe, you watch the greats like Michael Jordan. I love like Nick Saban as a coach. Like you see all these, Tom Brady was great at this stuff. And it's like, what makes them successful? Is it the fact that they're competitive and that drive that just pushes them past a certain limit? So whatever, I was going down the rabbit hole last night, this morning, and I was like trying to like figure out like, okay, is there actually any research or data or something more objective versus just my bias around this of like that competition or a competitive personality type is going to be something that is not going to necessarily guarantee a success, but really increase the likelihood like tenfold, right? And I didn't really find anything that really backed up my story, which was interesting. And I was like, huh, like I would think that that would be like, it would pop up right away that like, yes, for sure. If you are a more competitive person, you are going to be more successful. Um, so that's where I kind of started to add the layer of this mastery side of it too, right? Of like, what are the things that motivate you in life? What are the things that drive you in life? Is it the competition? Is it mastery? Like all these things that I kind of wrote down. So to kind of give you guys a little 2 cents of like where my frame was when I was thinking about and writing this episode of like, okay, for me, have always felt that my competitive nature is a pro and a con. I think like sometimes like my dad used to always say this when I was younger. He's like, you're a sore loser, and I'm like, it's true. Like I really don't like losing. I am, and I still think to this day I've like maybe have gotten better at not expressing my sore loser personality sometimes, that like losses are a part of the journey. But like I'm gonna tell you right now, it is not something that feels good to me. It's not something that I'm like happy with ever. It's not something I'm okay with even. And it doesn't matter, even like I'm going golf with my parents today, and it's just like my dad will be like, he like purposely doesn't keep a score, and he's better than me in golf, right? So like I think sometimes he does that to like maybe protect my energy a little bit. But I'm competitive. Like in my head, like sometimes he's like, how the hell do you know my score? I'm like, oh, I'm gonna keep a track. But I also try to think of it like, okay, like the most important thing at the end of the day is to be competitive with yourself. But when I opened up the gym, I was 25, turning 26 when we first opened up. I've always kind of felt like I had something to prove, and I think that like, and I always thought it was a competition thing at the core of it was like, I want to be competitive and I want to show other people that I can do things, and I've always loved the underdog story of every story I've read or every athletic kind of like famous story that's ever been like, a movie, a book, it's like, we love the underdog. Everyone loves the underdog. For me, it's like when I left high school and didn't go to college, or I went to college for a few weeks and then dropped out. I kind of always had this little chip on my shoulder that was like, fuck, I have something to prove, like I don't want people to think that like, oh, you didn't go to college, you dropped out, went to community, like, I got good grades in high school, but like I always felt like there was just that thing, that weight on my shoulder that I was like, fuck that. I can show people that I can do it and I can be more successful than them. And that drive is never left. Like I still have that drive today, and I was talking when I was in this quarterly yesterday, and I was talking to him and I was telling him, I was like, like I've always been very competitive, but I don't really have, I don't need to express it in a lot of different avenues. Like for me, business has been my competition for now a decade. And I know that it'll change in the future. I know that there'll be things that I'm going to want to sign up for in the future, just because I haven't done it in 10 years, but like I grew up doing sports. I grew up doing competition. And for me, like I always felt like that was one of my strongest assets, was the fact that like I was so competitive that like I will do what it takes to win. I always remember this question, and when I got hired at Equinox, one of the first questions, or one of the weird interview questions they asked was like, "What's one of your worst traits?" And I was like, I'm a sore loser. And they're like, okay, well, what do you do to work on that? And I was like, I don't lose, and I felt like it's such a cocky statement to say, but I was 23 years old. Who cares? Like you're cocky at that age anyways. And I remember both the managers I was interviewing, they kind of like, chuckled a little bit and laughed. And I was like, that's my honest answer, right? Like I am a sore loser, but I will do what it takes to make sure that I'm not losing all the time, right? So whatever, let's just start firing these things off before I keep rambling on like my thought process on everything here. So what drives you? I'm going to kind of read through these and then we'll break them down more in detail. So like number one, money and targets, right? So when I think about work specifically, obviously this is going to be more of a professional kind of relationship to this part, is like there's some people that are very motivated by money, right? They're motivated by financial targets, and money, I think, is, Bob Marley says this really well, if all you do is chase money and money is numbers, numbers never end, you'll never be happy. And I realized that that's like an extrinsic motivation for a lot of us. And I had this at a very young age. I had this when I was more insecure about my life of like, am I going to be successful in not being the person that went to college? Am I going to be successful just being the trainer instead of the engineer, like, the techie that like everyone that I was surrounded by? So I was always very motivated to like prove a point with that. So like it was a target. And then you realize, and I was saying this in the quarterly yesterday, and he was like, oh, like, I feel like money has become less of a motivator because like I make enough to cover my needs. And I'm like, that happens to every human, and it happens at different levels because everyone's needs are different. But once you get to a certain point, the question of like more for what, you know what I mean? Like that will always be a big thing. So I'll come back into that later. Number 2 is impact, right? Like for us, one of the biggest things I think that I will always say is my favorite part of my job is like the level of impact that I get to make on other people. Like I don't even make money from this podcast. This podcast costs me money, right? Like I invest into these things, and the why I do it is because like I like sharing it, right? I think I like the act of storytelling. I like the act of educating. I like the act of motivating and inspiring people. And like I do get a decent amount of feedback from clients and people that like follow the newsletter or the podcast or whatever. So like it's the fuel that keeps me going. And that is really at the foundational level of it. It's like it's the impact. It's like it's something that I get to do to hopefully better somebody in some degree of their life, right? And and it takes me, a few hours a week of doing some type of stuff to like learn more and share it. Be like, but that's like for me at the core of why I love coaching is like I get to make an impact. I get to do things for my community. I get to do things for other people. And I think being of service is one of those very high level human nature things that we should all have a degree of striving towards, right? The third one, is external competition, right? Well, my favorite job to date, well, I really did I liked Equinox, and there's a lot I disliked and hated, but I did like Equinox as far as the structure of the company. But like as far as what I enjoyed the most, my second gym, so not second job, second gym, I worked at Gilroy Health and Fitness. I got hired as an assistant fitness manager at 19 years old. And I remember like I was like in a group interview with like 4 people, and I was like, Jason Jamie was like kind of a mentor of mine. And I said, like, why did you hire me? He's like, you're the only one that tried selling me 6 PT sessions a week. It's like now as a 35-year-old, I'm like, I don't think I'd really be telling people that like, oh, 6 times a week is what you need, right? If anything, I think 6 times might even be overboard for a lot of people. But he's like, you're the only one that was like bold enough to be like, no, 6 times a week, because like, why? More is better, right? It's just like, think about the likelihood. You go to 3, you go to 6, that's 100% more. And he goes, I loved your math grade or whatever. So long story short, get hired as an AFM. I move up to a fitness manager, but then we had this like group chat, and I still have a group chat with the current team. Like we have our sales squad, we have our management mafia, we have the OG Palo Alto, and we have the Mountain View crew. And I love chats. Like for me, like group chats, we think about this with, was it Slack that most companies use? Like ours, we just use freaking iMessage because we're too small of a business to necessarily need something like that, I think. And we used to always just talk shit to each other. You'd be like, hey, we had nicknames. Like my nickname was Young Money. And I'd be like, Young Money just dropped a $2,000 PT package. And then I'd be like, 2 hours later, Young Money just dropped a twice a week. And we would just like be in this chat firing off these things. And I loved it because for me, I worked at a Gilroy location. We had a Los Gatos and Milpitas location at the time. And we would just kind of compete against other clubs. Even though we worked in the same company, we competed against clubs, right? Like my goal was to make Gilroy the best club as far as when it came to fitness side of it and personal training. So I was competing against Los Gatos. I was competing against Milpitas. Milpitas was dog shit. Los Gatos did pretty well, right? And it was always just like, fuck, we got to beat Los Gatos. We got to beat Los Gatos. So it was this external thing. Like when I played sports, I wanted to beat the other team, right? But then there's the thing, like when you look at the layers of competition externally, let's use sports as an example. When I'm on a sport, I guess if you were to even zoom out even a little bit more, most people that play a sport will be competitive against their desire to think that sport's the best versus other sports, right? So it's like if I'm a lacrosse player, I'm like, oh yeah, lacrosse is better than football. Lacrosse is better than baseball. Lacrosse is better than this, like because that was my bias. That's just like what I liked, right? And I think everyone that played their sport, like where if you had a main sport, would say that way. But then when you get into the league of whatever you're playing, then your goal is now like, screw these other teams. Now we're competing against them. But then inside the team, I had people that I was competing against for positions, right? So it's like, I want to be first string. I want to be, I loved being captain. I love being first string. I'm like, I want to be the top dog here, and I want to be a competitor, and I want to be a very high performer. So there's competition even inside the team, right? And then when you get even deeper than that, there's competition internally to yourself, right? Which is what I wrote down as number 4. But before I kind of zoom out of that, so like external competition is an extrinsic thing. It is something that I think all humans, sometimes we I've kind of gone through ebbs and flows of like, maybe external like competition is like not healthy. Like maybe it's not the thing that I should be using as a fuel source for me as far as what drives me for motivation in life. But I also think like, look at the goats, look at the greatest. Like the people are competing against other people. And I think it's a motivating thing. I had a client of ours, she's still here, and I won't share the name of the client or the other gym. And she was like, "Oh, I've been training at this other gym." And I just like want to share that, like, it's just like a very heartfelt message. And it was just like, it's always nice to hear those things. And she goes, "I trained at this other gym." And like, it's one of the things that was kind of like turned me off to her is like, she always had something like negative to say about you. And I'm like, and I've met this person because I've trained her husband a few times. Not a few times. He trained with us for almost a year. And it's a gym in Palo Alto. That's basically as far as I'll stretch that story. And I remember like leaving that message of like, okay, thanks for sharing that. Like, it was a very heartfelt thing of like how much she's loved the community and the coaches and the programming and just like everything about FL. And I remember the other part that kind of just like bit me and stung me a little bit was like, why the fuck is this person talking about me? Like, this person doesn't even know me. I don't think I've met this person maybe once or twice for like a brief 1 or 2 minute conversation, if that. And I remember that just being a motivating thing of like, screw that person. Like, in my head, I'm like, I'm competing against you, right? And I think about that with the gyms. It's like when I opened up Mountain View, I remember I looked at every Yelp and Google review of every other gym around us. So I'm like, okay, these are the people that we're competing with. So now I did the same thing with Palo Alto, and I do the same thing with the gyms. But then there's also like the fun competition. I will say from like the competition externally, like I've realized that with like um the like Mountain View location, for example, like I was always like it was the newest location. I was always trying to create a competitive atmosphere. But I realized that sometimes like this is kind of like the middle child syndrome or the young child syndrome. Sometimes if you're like part of one of two, that you're comparing yourself always to the more OG or the more vet one. Like Paul Alto is just 5 years older than Mountain View, so it's just more developed, right? It's just a well-oiled machine. The coaches there have been there longer. I have more clients just because they've been open for longer. And like sometimes I feel like it kind of created this toxic thing where I was like, maybe I should be reevaluating my foundation of like how I create culture around competition. But I always thought it was very healthy for me, right? But it's like, it's not for everyone, right? So that's something I do like to be clear on. So number 4, like I briefly touched on, is internal competition. I think the most important thing that any human can do to be successful with whatever you're doing in your life is you need to be competing against yourself. You are just trying to be better than yesterday's version. That's it. Like if you can just continually just keep pushing forward and keep trying to get better, this kind of ties me into number 5, which is mastery. For me, I think the most important skill that you can develop, or I mean, most important thing that you can develop is the skills, right? Which is kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, I think for me, like why I'm such a big reader, why I watch, 2-3 hour podcasts still instead of TV sometimes, why I like to listen to listen or watch a video on YouTube or something like that. It's like, I like to learn. And for me, like I've always been, I don't like fiction. I don't like cartoons. I'm not a Star Wars person. I'm not a Marvel person. There's nothing wrong with people that are. It's just never been something that really has been a motivating thing for me. It doesn't drive me. Like for me, it's like I really like I want to be one of the greatest of what I do. And for me right now, my situation is like, well, I'm a gym owner. I'm a coach. I would say I put myself more on the gym owner side of it because like business motivates me more than coaching does, which is why I don't coach as much. But I still love coaching. But then it's like, oh, I'm a husband, I'm a father in a month. It's like there's a lot of things that like I am very motivated by, and I want to be great at it. And I think that comes with this idea of mastery, that like mastery is the skill set of just getting really, really, really good at a certain thing. And it's interesting because one of the personal dilemmas that I've always kind of dealt with just my mindset in general is like pursuit of balance is the motto. Pursuit of balance is the name of this entire show. And I've always been someone that preaches that I think a degree of moderation is very healthy in life. I think like being able to balance out these things that like you can be financially successful and have a good social circle. You can have good physical health. Like you can do a lot of things. I think like this idea of mastery where I sometimes misrepresented it or misunderstood it, even is a better way to say it, is I thought like the idea of mastery is like you got to be bad at other things to be great at one thing, right? And it's like for me, it's like I'd rather be good at a lot versus be great at one and bad at a lot. But that's not true. I think like you can be great at something and still be good at a lot of things, right? And I think it's just the idea of understanding that there's a lot of parallels in life, right? There's a lot of skills that transfer over to different avenues of your life, right? I was saying this in this quarterly yesterday that I was like, I've always preached that sales and marketing and communication at the foundation of those two things is probably one of the most important skills that any human can learn, because it's like when you understand the ability of how to communicate effectively, excuse me, now I can be a better leader. I can be a better manager. I can be a better coach. I can be a better friend. I can be a better husband. I can be a better father. I can be a better friend. I can be a better brother. I can be a better son. I can be better at almost every aspect of my life because I understand the fundamentals of what makes communication work, which is like, hey, I can lead with listening to another person. I can ask questions. I can make it about the person. I can be empathetic. Like, those are all skills that I think transfer over to what I originally intended of learning, the skill of like, I just want to be better at sales so I can make more money for more commission. That's how it started. But then I realized as I matured and I got older, I was like, oh, like this is actually a skill that makes you good at a lot of things. And you realize that like a lot of these skill sets that we learn, like financial literacy. I study a lot of business and finances. Like I would say, honestly, more so nowadays, the last like 5 years, I probably spend more of my time reading about business and leadership and marketing and operations, and even the last couple of years, just economics and stocks. And I've never been like a big stock person. Like, I'm not even invested. So it's like half these things that I read about. I just like to kind of learn, I think like financial literacy was like it's an undeveloped skill just because it's never something that we're taught in school. I had one economics class that was pretty basic, right? So I think mastery is just like at the core of it is like, is that something that drives people? And I think that really drives those people that are to a degree internally competitive, but more importantly, want to be great at something, don't want to just be decent at something. Number 6 is autonomy. There's a lot of people in this world that just want to feel like, and I am one of those, that when I went to work as an employee, I always said autonomy was one of the most important things for me, because like if you kind of give me a degree of structure, but for the most part stay out of my way, I will be a high performer. The more you micromanage me, the more you tell me what to do, the more you get in my way, the more friction you cause, and the more mentally and emotionally I'm just like not involved, right? I don't really want to be a part of something like that. So those are always big things for me. So number 7 was progression and status. I think when it comes to motivation in life, the number one thing that we need to remember is motivation is a derivative of the progress you're making in your life. It's the progress you make in your job. It's the progress you make with your body. It's the progress you make in your relationships. And if you want to continually stay motivated and happy about all the things you're doing in your relationship, in your job, in your body, you need to keep driving progress. And right, and that comes with the understanding that complacency is what kills most. Right, people get complacent. Right. Another episode, I was almost going to do it as actually for next week's episode, was like, there's some people that have 10 years of experience. And there's some people that have 1 year of experience repeated 10 times. I've heard that. I forget who said that, but I remember when I heard that, it just like stuck with me. And I was like, so true, right? Like there's some people that like, I'll give you my career. I am in my 18th year of my career of the fitness industry, and I am still learning so much stuff. And it like kind of baffles me a little bit, because it's like, man, I feel like I should have known this a while ago. Like sometimes I see the coaches that I'm working with now that are like, on the team that are newer, within their first 1, 2, 3 years of the industry. And I'm like, fuck, I wish I knew half the shit they knew. But I was like, I just wasn't surrounded by the right people. And I don't know. It's interesting. Like when you think about all the progressions that could be made. And I think that's a little bit when I put progression and status, because I think there's an element of status that drives us. And I don't know if that's necessarily separate. Like I almost wrote it as two separate things, because I think progress of moving up, like, people think about this like chasing the corporate ladder or climbing the corporate ladder, I'm sorry, or progress that we make. There's an element of status at a human nature level that I think is something that drives us, right? I say this a lot to people when I'm like at my team, more importantly, when I'm in a one-on-one, and sometimes they'll bring up like, oh, I want to get into management, or I want to move up, or I want to be able to maybe one day own a gym or get into ownership. And it's funny now being on the other side of it for, I think, long enough where I'm like, are you sure? But like, I think a lot of people, we have to go through that. But really, I think the big driver for most people owning up a gym is like, for me, like I wanted the autonomy. I wanted the flexibility. I wanted to not be controlled or capped by somebody else. But really it was like, there was a huge element of ego and status in the beginning. Like I really just wanted to be like a business owner. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It's a funny thing. I was listening to a podcast last week, and it was talking about, it's interesting, like how most like children of immigrants, like my dad's from Canada, didn't move to Canada until he was like in his late 20s, barely spoke English. My mom was born in London in England. Like my mom's mom was Japan. My mom's dad was Switzerland. Like my family's all over the place. So it's like, I always say like a joke, it's like, I'm first generation American. But it's funny because like I think like I'm like I don't know if that's true or if that's correlation, but like for me it's like I've always had that drive. Like I don't know what it was. Was it like my parents kind of did their own thing with like owning real estate, but they still worked. Like my dad worked in, gas and electric companies all the way until he was in his mid 40s before he retired from, corporate world. So there was always that something that was motivating to me, and I think there was an element of like status as well. Eight is belonging, right? I think a lot of us is like what drives us is we want to be part of something, right? We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and this is why you think about like a religion, for example, is such a big and has such a huge following. Is like there's a sense of belonging. Why you think about sports fans or fans in general is like there's a sense of belonging that keeps us together, and it's always cool when you see that. Like I think about that with sports personally. Like, the World Cup just ending, last week. It's just like there's a lot of things that just bring people together just at the belonging side. And that's what drives us too as humans. Number nine is identity. Is like who do you want to be known for? And like what is the identity that you're trying to create? Because James Clear talks about this a lot with the atomic habits that like if you really want to make sustainable change, the identity needs to shift. The identity needs to be changed because if you just talk about change or make these little micro changes, they don't stick. And the reason why they don't stick is the identity of who you are. Are you someone that's known? And this is not known to other people, but known to yourself. Are you someone that is a healthy eater or someone that's trying to eat healthy food? Like those are like two little simple frames that like a lot of people don't think about. Then number 10, the last one is just fear and scarcity, right? Like there's a lot of times in the marketing world that we think about this. I mean, what is the most powerful thing that I can think about is like news, right? Social media and news and like, your 6 o'clock news. What are they driven off? They're like one out of maybe 20 things they talk about is good. It's all fear. It's all fear mongering. It's all fear based. And I always say like the reason why so many fucking people are stressed. And it's funny because like when I was younger, I always thought like, oh, maybe it's just kids that are anxious, right? Or not kids, like at a young level, but like when you get be teens and young adults, because you're like, oh, just trying to figure out life. You're on your own. You're little like you're easy to manipulate, influence. Then I realized, like now being older, I'm like, dude, there's so many 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, and 60-year-olds that are just fucked up on the stress side of things because they just are influenced by all these things. And all they do is surround themselves by it. And we're just like kind of trapped because we just keep wanting to see more. Like, oh, I don't want to see it, but like I do want to see it. But that's fear. That's scarcity, right? Scarcity in the marketing world is like, I only have 3 left. If you don't purchase now, you might not ever get the ability to do so, right? So scarcity is always something that obviously is a very strong tactic, which is a strong driver as human nature. So that was a very long-winded way to break down that first part, right? So fuel types and burn rates is kind of the next section, which is like the way I look at this of what drives you as a human is like the fast burning stuff, right? Is money, external competition, and fear. What I mean by fast burning is they're not sustainable, right? Like if I put racing fuel in my car, it's expensive, right? Which could be an analogy for a handful of things. And you're going to burn your miles per gallon are going to be way lower than something else, right? And the reason why is because how it burns, right? And that's what makes racing fuel such a performance gas, because it will allow you to go faster, right? So like you can make a lot of change very fast by chasing money. You can make a lot of change very fast by chasing external competition and competing against everyone else around you. And you can make a lot of change based out of fear, right? But I don't look at those as something that we want to build our entire life off. I said like those are fast burning things. What I wrote down is slow burn, right? Things that are more sustainable, things that have better gas mileage for the sake of the analogy, right? Is impact, belonging, and autonomy. Those are things that can keep us going for a very long time. I said this in the quarterly that like I used to chase money. I used to chase status. I probably put status in the fast burn too. But I realized that I was like, oh, it's actually like my impact of what I do for a living is actually the thing that fills my cup. Like it's the thing that makes me excited that I'm like at the core of it, I don't think about it like out loud as my first response. But at the core of it, when I spend enough time alone and like reflection, I go like, no, the idea that I get to be a part of something that helps other people, like I touch on this all the time. It's always been kind of like the core of it. And then the big thing for me personally is autonomy, right? And I wrote down autonomy in that section too, because like the autonomy gives us this idea that like, we want freedom. I think a lot of times we don't necessarily want money. We just want the freedom that money can provide us. And like money is a resource, and that resource can buy us more time, which is another valuable resource that's more valuable than time, obviously. But the idea of autonomy kind of is built on the same foundation that like it's freedom. It's really like what we are chasing is freedom. And autonomy does not happen only as an entrepreneur. It does not happen only as a business owner. You can find autonomy in little contracting gigs as W-2 employee. Like there's ways to create autonomy. I always say, and this is a very selfish thing to say for me, but like I wish I found someone like myself to work for when I was younger. I worked in more corporate stuff. The smaller gyms I worked at, we never did any education. I never really had support on the professional side. It was very, on the autonomy side, it was like the most autonomic, if that's a word. Which was cool to one degree, but like it really didn't allow me to grow because like I wanted autonomy, but I also needed some of that push and that professional motivation and like the education to be able to understand like, am I just free by myself, like running around in a field alone? Or am I actually still working towards a higher thing, but I have autonomy built within, right? And then the ones that really compound are just your mastery and your identity. And I think those are interrelated because I think like your identity is like someone that really chases mastery. I think at the core of that, like that is your identity. And I think identity is something that like we're trying to always shift and shape as much as we can to kind of build the life you want. It has to be built around the person you are. And I think mastery is this thing that we should hopefully all be chasing because like I think one of the most fulfilling things, right? And this is another point that I brought across my quarterly yesterday, was I was telling him, I was like, mastery, like get really good at this, right? Like just understand that like you getting good at it is a degree of progression. It's a degree of status. It's a degree of beating yourself and beating others because you're focusing on mastery, right? And that's the thing that's going to compound over time. And it's like, it's funny because like we try to look at some of these things of like, okay, is this the shining light? Is this the grass is greener? But like at the core of it, what's the core? I always try to come back to like, what is the foundation and the parallel between all those things, right? So those are the three things that I wrote down. And the last kind of like part that I wrote down, which doesn't necessarily maybe have as much substance, but like Robert Greene, like he calls this like his mastery arc, right? And like life tasks, like when it comes to like finding things that you are going to be, when you think about mastery, what drew you to something prior to being told to do it, right? So for me, I'll give you an example. I feel on the mastery side of things, as far as my life goes, I would say that like running a gym or the gym itself and training, like basically my industry, I feel very, very competent in, right? I feel very competent. You put me in any room with any other gym owner, like I feel like I could hold my ground, right? You put me in any room with any other trainer, like I can have a good conversation because I really put a lot of effort and resources and time into learning those things. But I was drawn to it prior to making it a job, right? The reason why I applied to work at Extreme Fitness is because I was working out there for 2 years. And I said, fuck, I think this would be a cool job. Like I had no idea what it would evolve into. That's one of those things when I think about mastery for people is like, finding that thing that is going to guide you or pull you is like, what guided you before there was a need? What guided you before you were trying to impress your parents or your friend? What guided you before you just like, I graduated with this degree, so I might as well do it. Those are the things that I think kind of pull us towards things. Apprenticeship. So being an apprentice, I think is another good mindset that I think like he talks about a lot in this book. And I think it's just a great kind of mindset to run with, is having deep observation, right? Which leads to skill acquisition and developing the skills themselves and then experimenting with these things, right? And when you think about the idea of being an apprentice, it's like you're learning, you're studying the greats, you're learning from other people, you're learning from other systems, you're learning from hands-on application. You're developing those skills now, and then you get to go play with those skills and experiment those skills, right? And I think that's just a powerful thing that most people can do, is just like understand there should be a lot of freedom and play, and kind of relax kind of approach in the beginning, because like have fun with it. It's like the same way I would look at a kid with sports. It's like I want my kids to play sports for sure. I'm not going to push them or force them to do anything, but I just want them to have exposure. I want them to have fun. I want them to be able to play with it. I want them to have freedom to kind of figure out where they are drawn towards, of like, I'm going to expose you to as many things as I can, because that's why for me as a parent, I think is like a really important thing that for me I loved, and like I want to be able to share that with my kid. So I think that having that apprenticeship or that apprentice mindset is always a big thing. Another thing I wrote down was like having 5 to 10 years of deliberate practice, right? Like talent doesn't happen overnight. Everyone hears the overnight success. People forget how fucking long it took, like every great, it doesn't matter if it's like, Tom Brady being drafted, the 200 person, right? Or you think about Elon Musk, like one of the, I know a lot of people don't like Elon Musk, but like as far as, at the end of the day, like what he's done on the business level, like you have to pay some degree of respect. It's insane. but like you hear the stories, you see the upbringing, you see what they've done. And it's like, fucking A, like a lot of people just look at, he's a trillionaire, right? Or it's Tom Brady, it's the GOAT. It's like, no, you didn't see any of the stuff that was behind the scenes. You didn't see any of the hardship. And that's where for me, like, I don't really have a huge amount of respect for those that just have an opinion from people at the top. It's interesting because I think a human nature part of like humans is everyone will clap you on the way up. Everyone's going to clap you on the climb, right? And I've dealt with this a tad bit with some people around me, like some people that I was like, like, okay, like is that jealousy now? Like, what the fuck's going on? But you see this where it's like some people you start climbing, you start growing, you start becoming good, you start becoming better. And then eventually you get to this point where now everyone dislikes you, right? And it's kind of like this billionaire, like this debate that I think a lot of people have. I'm not very political at all, I would say. And it's funny when I hear that kind of conversation of like, people are like, oh, it's fuck the billionaires, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, think about all the jobs that they created for other people, right? But I'm like, also like, respect the self-made ones. Like, how fucking impressive is that to make that amount of money? I agree. Who needs that amount of money? I don't need that amount of money. But like, those people I don't think are chasing money. I think those people are chasing growth. Those people are chasing maybe status. There's other things, intrinsic and intrinsic, that are driving them. But I think it's like it's crazy to me, right? The other one I wrote down: find a mentor and surpass them, right? Everyone should have a mentor that they are working with. It doesn't matter if it's a coach, it's a trainer, it's a golf instructor, it's a manager, it's a business person, it's another athlete that's coaching you, like all these things where your goal, is like to learn from those and get better. I think about this as another parenting trait that I want to make my kid more successful than me, just like my dad wanted me to be more successful than him. And I think that's just a natural generational hand down of like, we want to see the next generation be better, right? Which is why I'm such a big believer in sharing education and all these type of things. And then social intelligence is another part of mastery, because like at the end of the day, like having a technical skill without being able to read people, I think you run into a ceiling much faster than having a degree of social intelligence, because all the skills that you have, they become powerful when you can utilize them for other people, right? Not on other people, for other people. And that's an important kind of separation of verbiage. All right. I feel like that's a long one, but I hope you guys got some good little nuggets on that, because like really it stemmed from me having a quarterly and trying to help find a degree of motivation for this person, or what drives them for them. Because for me, like, I'm not a manager that believes on push and force all the time. Like, I want you to feel that you have something, that you have a lighthouse, you have a guiding light, you have something that you're attracted towards and being drawn towards. And everyone is driven by different things, and we need to find what for you personally drives you. So as always, if you guys feel that was a good one, share that with other people that you feel like can get some good nuggets, and I'll see y'all next week.